subjected to hearing of the outbreak of the Civil War and how they interacted with masters is rare. What little we know usually has to be filtered through the accounts of whites. The great strength of William's story is the immediacy it brings to a slave's perspective on the climax of secession, the seminal event in Southern history. Solid, state-centered studies of secession, heavily political in orientation, first appeared in the 1930s. Major works in the 1970s pushed research on secession in new directions by focusing on race and class, including pervasive fears over slave insurrections, concerns that the Republicans would shut down profitable outlets for slavery, and worries by planters over a looming crisis of control within the South. Also examined were the unsettling effects of rapid internal change that led the yeomanry to fear a loss of their liberties to dark, sinister outside forces, best represented by the anti-slavery North. The cultural turn of the 1980s produced an influential analysis of how the Southern Code of Honor demanded a rejection of the shameful degradation of submitting to a Republican administration that defamed Southerners and their way of life. A study on the cultural dynamics of low-country South Carolina argued for the primacy of patriarchy, the exercise of authority and power of white heads of household over their family members, and in some cases slaves, as the bond that united whites in defense of their local worlds. A methodologically innovative work linked divisions in the Upper South over secession to competing cultural attitudes toward the direction of future economic development. More recent research has stressed the point that anxieties over the loss of slavery and racial control, rather than a defense of states' rights, drove the South to secession. The doctrine of states' rights was always a tactical means for protecting slavery, and revealingly the Confederate Constitution did not recognize the right of secession. The last major work on secession emphasized that planters, especially those in South Carolina, feared that the erosion of slavery in the border slave states and its stagnation in the Upper South were a prelude to emancipation within the South. They defied rule by Northern majorities at the national level in an undemocratic bid to ensure their future control over slavery in an independent South. To gain popular support from doubting Southerners, they justified secession less in the dry, legalistic language of exercising a constitutional right to leave the Union, and more as the same revolutionary right of a free people as that exercised by the patriots of the American Revolution in overturning British tyranny. Rebels in the Making offers, for the first time, a one-volume narrative history of secession in all the 15 slave states. Grounded in the deepening strains within Southern society as the slave economy matured in the mid-18th century, and Southern ideologues struggled to convert whites to the orthodoxy of slavery as a positive good, it focuses on the years 1860 to 61, when the sectional crisis exploded into secession and civil war. Organized chronologically, it details the election of 1860 and the events in the summer and fall of 1860 that resulted in fears readily exploited by secessionists as they launched a movement in South Carolina that spread across the South in a frenzied atmosphere Southern whites referred to as the Great Excitement. The middle chapters explore why secession stalled in the Upper South, and how and why moderates and former conservatives pushed aside the original secessionist radicals in laying down the foundations of the Confederate States of America at a convention in Montgomery, Alabama, in February 1861. It concludes with the final crisis over Fort Sumter that precipitated war and a second phase of secession in the Upper South when Lincoln sent a relief expedition to the fort. This book makes several contributions to understanding secession. First and foremost, it affirms the centrality of slavery in the coming of the crisis, the failure to reach a compromise, and the founding mission of the Confederacy. Many whites may have had moral doubts over slavery, but they were united in their opposition to any outside interference with the institution. More than previous studies, it documents the initial caution.